deep thanks to Matt and to Randy and Ron and Alexandra and Eric and Molly and everyone and all of you for showing up tonight. I'm delighted to be here. I wrote a book about the loss of agricultural biodiversity, but it's really a book about love. And it's a book about my love of food. Sadly, there's been a bunch of deaths in our family, and like a couple of weeks later, my uncle died. And the first thing I heard my mother say on the other end of the phone is, "What happened?" And then the second question was, "Who's bringing this food?" And I realized, like, we celebrate with it, we mourn through it. It's the touchstone of who we are. Here's the deal. In my lifetime, I'm 45 years old. Since I was in college in Northampton, since the early 90s, our food system has changed so radically. That food pyramid that we used to talk about, now we talk about the food, the plate. But it's like the point is as fine as Seattle's Space Needle. We're at a point where we are, what is the exact stat? 3/4 of our food is coming from 12 plant and 5 animal species. And increasingly it's wheat, it's rice, it's corn, it's palm oil, it's soybeans. And this research isn't just conjecture. It was done, there was a team of researchers that looked at 50 years of data on what the major crops that 98% of the world eats. And what they realized was that this is what's happening on a global scale. The trend is toward what they coined the global standard diet. Same types of food, same amounts. That's why we're now seeing more people are dying from diseases related to being overweight or obese than from being underweight, because they're still what Raj Patel calls stuffed and starved. We are starved of micronutrients. We're suffering from micronutrient malnutrition, and this results in a wealth of health challenges, but it also is a reflection of what we're doing to agriculture. So what shows up on our plate and what ends up happening to our body is not distinct from what's happening in the field. And I wanted to really connect those things. So this loss of agricultural biodiversity, is a situation where 95% of our food comes from just 30 species. And you go to the grocery store and you think to yourself, like, what the hell is Simran talking about? Like, I see an abundance of choice. If you're a little bit older than me, that you would say, like, my grandparents didn't have the kind of choices we have now. And what researchers and I would say back to you is, on a local level, when you find that random mango that doesn't grow here, yes, through globalization, we now have an increase of biodiversity on a local scale. You're seeing, these lychees all of a sudden are available and what have you, and they're not from here. But globally, we're moving toward this shrinking plate. And, this presents a challenge because it increases risk. If you think about it this way, like, if you have money to save, and you went to an investment person, they wouldn't say, hey, Matt, just put everything in 2 stocks and you'll be secure for the future. They would say diversify. First time it was Al Gore and Leonardo DiCaprio, right? And I was like guest C, they call it, the ancillary tiny guest. And then I got promoted. And I thought to myself, I'm talking to Oprah. We're right, here's Oprah, here's me. And I'm talking about eco-friendly cleaning products and just, use vinegar and lemons. And in my head, the narrative is, what have I done wrong? That I'm still taught that we haven't moved the needle, that I'm talking about like wiping down surfaces with vinegar, and we're not talking about justice, and we're not talking about infrastructure. And I keep talking about it. When the producer called me right before that last show, she said, Simran, is there anything new in weather stripping? No, it's still just weather stripping. Like, just insulate your house, but it needed to be sexy and hot, and it's not, and it's also not easy. If we were going to solve our most pressing global problems, I've been talking now about this stuff for decades, and I'm old and I'm tired, and it hasn't happened yet. So the problem is, like, it's the people who are not here tonight who need to be part of this conversation, and who need to have a seat at the table, and who need to feel empowered. And I believe the way that we can do that is through taste, and through embracing the fact that, like, this is something that we all share. We're grappling now with so many different paradoxes around this. What a lot of large-scale agribusinesses and well-intentioned nonprofits and food manufacturers will say is, we have to move toward this narrow diet, because that's the only way we can feed our world, right? There's so many hungry people. This is the only way we can feed a population of over 9 billion by 2050. But I want to counter that narrative. And this is the social justice portion of the evening before we get to the beer, which is this. Every time you hear a statistic that tells you we need to eat this way, this crappy way, in order to feed the population, I want you to remember this. We create 1.5 times enough food to feed everybody on the planet. We throw, here in the United States, 40% of our food away. 30 to 40% of our population is obese or overweight, and 1 in 5 is hungry, right here in the United States. So these paradoxes, and if you look at that statistic, if you break it down by race and ethnicity, it's crushing. Like, 1/3, 1/4, 2/3 are hungry. And it's kids, in a country where we're throwing 40% of our food away. So there's great opportunity that is kind of being overlooked. The corn that we grow, the soybeans that we grow, they're resistant to insecticides or herbicides. They're high-yielding varieties. But I don't go to the grocery store and buy something for yield. I buy it for taste. I buy it for, do I know how to cook it? I buy it for how it connects to who I am. But that's not why we grow it. And that's not even why it ends up in the grocery store. We have 1 banana in the grocery store. Globally, we grow 1,000. That 1 banana, maybe you've heard some of the news reports, it's called the Cavendish. It's succumbing to a disease. It's a disease that starts in the soil. It's a fungus, and it's known as Panama disease. And it's a strain of the same disease that felled the banana that was its predecessor, which if you're anywhere above the age of 50, you probably remember a banana that was sweeter, that was a little bit bigger, a little bit brighter, called the Gros Michel or the Big Mike banana. So we've replaced that banana with something that's inferior. And that's happened with the banana, and that's happening with chocolate, and we can go down the line and what that's happening to, but it's invisible. Like, we just eat what's in the grocery store. We see those 5 apples. If you're like me, you're wondering why the Red Delicious has any shelf space, because it's an offense to all things delicious or apple. Well, it looks pretty. So that's why it's there, because who the hell's eating it? I don't know. But it's there for a reason that isn't connecting to why I eat. And we can grow 1,000 varieties of apples right here in America. But every historic fruit and vegetable has disappeared in the last century. And some people are like, well, that's okay. I mean, I didn't miss those random apples anyhow. I'm good without them. But it's part of who we are. It's part of our story. And it's part of what we can do to build a more resilient food system. But we keep creating a system where everything tastes the same, everything looks the same, we're in the same jeans, we're using the same phone. Like, anywhere in the world, you're going to find that McDonald-ization of everything. But I actually think there's something really special about hanging on to what's different. And not only for these cultural reasons or these romanticized versions of what I am and who I want to be in the world, but also for risk reasons. If we lose those varieties, if we end up with just that 1 banana and we haven't saved diverse varieties, we can't breed back in the traits that we don't have. So we need to keep diversity so we can make sure that we're not putting all our eggs in one basket, so to speak. What conservationists haven't really thought of is our role as eaters. So we save it by eating it. We save it by reaching for those foods and creating a market so people like Eric and Molly can keep creating gorgeous chocolate here at Somerville, right? Or so farmers that you see at the farmers market can keep growing those diverse varieties of tomatoes or what have you. They can't grow it if there's no market for it. I talk about it a lot with chocolate. Chocolate is my heart. But the tensions are not oh, am I going to be able to upgrade my phone? No, the tension is is my child going to have medicine? And we hear that as an abstraction, and I had understood it as an abstraction, but then I went to these places. And I hope that through my writing, I bring those places to you. Because what I realized is the global standard diet is wheat, rice, corn, etc. But I'm actually going to be okay if corn disappears. I'm good with that. But coffee has been my anchor every single day of my adult life. It sets the tone of every single day. Chocolate has been every single birthday cake. It was my wedding cake, got me through my divorce, wrote every page of this 298-page book, and of course fueled today, because it fuels every single day. And that's what I don't want to have disappear. So what I did was I researched this from the microbial level all the way through to there's an octopus chapter too, right? I told us through bread, wine, coffee, chocolate, beer, and octopus, which is random, and you'll have to read the book to find out why that's there. But what I wanted to do was like bring it back to what we love and where we live. And for anyone who's like, oh, you're asking me to eat like fancy, esoteric, weird things I've never heard of. No, I'm asking you to choose craft beer over Bud Light. And you're already part of this decision of doing something better. And again, I'm not just saying that to like inflate you with a false sense of purpose. I am saying that the researchers who I talked to said anything outside of those 5 foods is now a radical act, and that is a direct quote. The pivot in the grocery store toward the olive oil, that's the real olive oil, is now a radical act because so much of what we're consuming are these 5 things. But that whatever your care is, especially around food, is also under threat right now. This isn't relegated to just a handful of crops. This is how we grow food now. Yeast is extraordinary. Yeast turns the juice to wine. Yeast is what gives beer its effervescence. It's what turns the wort, which is basically the sweet barley, the malted grain water, into beer. But yeast is also, it's the first organism with a nucleus that we sequenced because yeast helps us understand who we are. 20% of our disease genes are swappable with yeast. So yeast are these very simple organisms. So scientists can study yeast as a way to kind of study us, right? And so they'll test pharmaceuticals, they'll look at basic life processes. They've all been studied, but through the lens of yeast rather than through us. But it's a pure reflection of who we are. And I think it's also fascinating that yeast causes the bread to rise, and bread is such a seminal, or wheat is such a seminal part of faith traditions. So there's something to me very esoteric and beautiful here. Before chemists, before Pasteur, before all the host of people whose names I can't remember right this second, but who are in the book, discovered what fermentation was around beer, they described this process of this barley water or malted grain water becoming beer as God is good. It was just like, and then magic happened, and it became something that got us drunk, Although our bodies contain about 100 trillion cells, only 10% of them are human. The rest are microbes, weighing in at about 3 pounds in the average adult, about the same weight as our brain. They are the first and most critical link in our personal food chain, helping us digest and extract nutrients from food and protecting us from harmful microorganisms that might make us sick. This is symbolic of what's happening to everything. We have stripped away a lot of the diversity in the yeast that we use in beer. But there are these select breweries in the United States that are recognizing the magic of yeast. A lot of breweries are scared of it, like I am. Like, I don't know, that's so much science. It is astonishing. It is staggering and humbling to me how actually hard it is to make extraordinary, really just spectacular beer. But this microbiology portion, a lot of breweries like kind of skirt around by just getting powdered yeast, right? And letting it do its thing and then, saving it and reusing it and what have you. But there comes a point where they can't reuse it. And that's why we have places like the National Collection of Yeast Cultures. It is a place that, this place where I visited in England is one of the biggest storehouses for yeast in the world. But that diversity has shifted because, again, brewers will use the same powdered yeast. Bakers will use the same powdered yeast. Both of them are a version of a yeast called Saccharomyces or VCA. But interestingly enough, we've only categorized. We've only understood a tiny fraction of what kind of yeast is available. And I just rattled off for you why yeast is so important, why microbes are so important. But what I can tell you is we've classified, we understand about 1% of all the yeast that's out there. So when an animal is endangered, when an animal goes extinct or a plant goes extinct, so do all the microorganisms that were part of that. And we're now, there's all this talk right now about the yeast microbiome and how so much of our health is determined by our gut and what's seated here and the flora and what's living and how it relates to the brain and everything. We're just at the tip of kind of this exploration of what microorganisms are and how incredibly important they are. And I think preserving them in places like beer helps us to understand like how we can love them in other places. There are bakers that are also doing the same thing using wild yeast. But I'm really keen to try this beer tonight because I think what a lot of brewers have done is said like, hey, the grain came from here or we got the hops locally, but yeast is hard. There's a whole lab dedicated to it. Where is the lab? Over there? Right over there. If you're not familiar with it, I encourage you to press your face to the glass and spend some time looking at it, and hopefully Randy and Ron will teach you all the nuances, and Igor, of what the magic is going on there. That it's symbolic of everything, and that we have a real opportunity here to start to reshape what food looks like, and that is by making a different set of decisions, and that is by supporting people who exhibit that same kind of curiosity and that same kind of gratitude toward food. I think if we can embrace it and really own it and know what those decisions mean, then we might make different ones, or we might make more delicious ones, or we might simply be grateful for what we have. So here's the theme, okay? The poem's called Love After Love. The time will come, it's by Derek Walcott, when with elation you will greet yourself, arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast,